Discovered 31K affair texts on my wife's phone, exposed her lies, and took back control of my life. I thought I knew everything about my wife. We had been together for years, built a life together, and even started a family. But one day, I found myself staring at something that shattered everything I believed. It wasn't a small slip-up, a moment of weakness, or a misunderstanding. No, it was much worse. I discovered 31,000 messages. That was the number of texts my wife had exchanged with another man, a man who had become an ongoing affair behind my back. The texts were not innocent. They were filled with lies, deceit, and a level of betrayal I couldn't comprehend. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a systematic betrayal, a carefully hidden secret that she thought would never come to light. At first, I could barely process the gravity of it all. But as I read through the messages, the shock turned to anger. And then, something inside me snapped. I had enough. I was done being in the dark. It was time for the truth to come out, and I was going to expose her lies, take back control of my life, and rebuild it stronger than ever before. I thought I had the perfect life, beautiful wife, 2 wonderful children, a stable career, and a cozy home. But one day, everything I believed in came crashing down. It all started innocently enough, like many things do, with an uneasy feeling that I couldn't shake. It wasn't anything too obvious at first, just small changes in her behavior, tiny inconsistencies that didn't make sense at the time. But over the months, they started to add up, and I began to question everything. For years, I had trusted my wife completely. I had never once doubted her commitment to our family or our relationship. We had built a life together, side by side. Our marriage was not perfect, but we were partners in everything. We supported each other through the rough patches and celebrated each victory together. Our life wasn't always exciting or glamorous, but it was real and solid. She had always been loving, dependable, and affectionate. At least, that was my belief. But the cracks began to show. It was subtle at first, a missed phone call here, a message left unanswered there, but the longer it went on, the harder it became to ignore. She started working later, claiming she was swamped with deadlines, but her work life had never been more manageable. Her late-night meetings started taking her out of town more often, and yet she always seemed so secretive. I tried to let it slide at first, dismissing it as nothing more than stress or a phase, but the feeling of unease refused to go away. Eventually, I started wondering if there was something more to her behavior. But I never imagined what I was about to uncover. We met during our college years. She was studying communications, and I was pursuing business management. Both of us were ambitious, excited about our futures, and deeply in love. We connected immediately, sharing common goals and dreams, and before we knew it, we were inseparable. We quickly became that couple everyone admired, the kind that seemed destined for greatness. Our early years together were filled with adventure. We traveled, explored new hobbies, and spent hours talking about our plans for the future. It was like we could conquer the world together. After a few years of dating, I proposed, and we got married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by friends and family. Life felt perfect. I remember looking at her on our wedding day and thinking I had everything I needed. We built our home, found stable careers, and eventually welcomed children into our lives. Marriage had its ups and downs, of course, but we were always on the same team. I was fully committed to her and to our family, and I believed she was committed to me as well. When we had kids, it only seemed to strengthen our bond. The demands of parenthood kept us busy, but we always made time for each other, or at least I thought we did. We laughed together, raised our children together, and celebrated every milestone along the way. I thought that our shared history would always be enough to keep us close. But little did I know, things had changed. Gradually, I started feeling a distance between us. I blamed it on the routine of daily life, work, kids, and responsibilities piling up. But even in those moments of connection, something felt off. At the time, I had no idea how deeply the fabric of our relationship had been torn until the day I found the phone that would shatter my world. It all began on a seemingly normal afternoon. I had come home early from work to surprise my wife. The kids were at a friend's house for a playdate, and I figured it would be a good opportunity for us to spend some quality time together. When I walked through the door, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in hand. She quickly shoved it into her purse when she saw me, and it was this small, peculiar reaction that sparked something in me. There was no reason for her to hide her phone from me. It was our home, after all, and we had always been open about our personal devices. At first, I brushed it off as nothing, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. But the unease I had been feeling for months now felt more pronounced. I had noticed how her behavior had become more guarded. The late nights had become more frequent, and when she was home, her attention seemed to be elsewhere. There were times when I would try to talk to her, but she would offer up a half-hearted response or suddenly be too tired to engage in a conversation. It all made sense in hindsight, the subtle signs that I had ignored for so long. That afternoon, after she went to take a shower, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something. I had never been the type to snoop, but my growing suspicion took over. I picked up her purse, quietly opened it, and retrieved her phone. My heart pounded as I turned it on and entered the passcode that I had known for years. The phone unlocked instantly. She had never been particularly protective of her devices, and I had never felt the need to pry. But this time was different. I felt a strange compulsion to find out what was really going on. I opened her text messages, and that was when I found it. Over 31,000 text messages. It felt like my whole world paused as I scrolled through the hundreds of conversations, each one more damning than the last. The first few messages were innocent enough, casual conversations with friends, family updates, the typical texts that didn't raise any alarms. But then I came across something that made my stomach drop. There, hidden in a thread with an unsaved number, were intimate messages exchanged over the course of the last several months. They were explicit, full of affection, and filled with promises of future meetings. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a full-blown affair, carried on under my nose for who knows how long. My hands shook as I continued reading, my mind racing with disbelief. I had always thought that the trust we shared was unbreakable. But now, as I read through these messages, I realized how thoroughly I had been deceived. The affair wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a planned and repeated betrayal. The text messages detailed intimate rendezvous, elaborate excuses about where she was going, and sweet nothings exchanged between her and this man I didn't know. My mind began to race. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And more importantly, why had she done this? The deeper I scrolled, the more it became clear. She had been seeing this man for months, if not longer. And all along, I had been none the wiser. What struck me the hardest was her justification for it all. She didn't feel guilty, not at all. She believed she deserved it. According to the texts, my wife felt entitled to this affair. The strain of our busy lives, the stresses of raising children, and my work schedule had made her feel neglected. She had convinced herself that I wasn't paying enough attention to her, that I had somehow failed her. So, instead of coming to me with her feelings, she found solace in another man's arms. She thought it was okay because she deserved the attention, the excitement, and the passion that I had apparently failed to provide. At that moment, something inside me broke. The feelings of betrayal, anger, and confusion were overwhelming. I had been so blind, so completely unaware of the emotional distance between us. And worse still, I had been completely devoted to a woman who had no intention of returning that loyalty. As I continued reading the messages, I couldn't help but feel a rising sense of disgust. Not only had she betrayed my trust, but she had also treated me like I was a fool, unaware of the life she was leading behind my back. I had always been the one to work hard for our family, to provide everything she and our children needed. But she had been living a double life, and I had been left out of the loop completely. When she came out of the shower, I put the phone back exactly where I had found it. I acted as though nothing had changed, though everything inside me felt different. I couldn't confront her yet, not in that moment. But I knew something had to be done. I had to expose the truth, not just for my own peace of mind, but also for my own dignity. The next few days were a blur. I didn't know how to approach her, how to confront her without causing an irreversible fallout. But one thing was clear, I was no longer the man who had trusted her completely. I wasn't the husband she thought she knew anymore. The man she had been cheating on was gone, and in his place was a man who would no longer let her get away with this betrayal. I spent sleepless nights considering my options. I didn't want to keep this secret. I couldn't live with the weight of it anymore. I wasn't going to let her lie her way out of this. She owed me the truth, and she owed me the honesty I had always given her. The moment of confrontation arrived sooner than I had expected. I had spent several days grappling with the emotions of betrayal, hurt, and anger, and I knew I could not go on living this lie. It had to come out. I needed her to face what she had done, to understand the gravity of her actions, and to acknowledge the pain she had caused me. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I could hardly keep my composure. I was quiet, distant, trying to come up with the right words to say. She noticed my shift in behavior almost immediately. Her eyes flickered with suspicion, but she did not ask anything. Instead, she continued eating, seemingly unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Finally, after a long silence, I broke. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, confused, as if she did not understand. "What do you mean, you know?" "I know about the messages," I continued, each word feeling heavier than the last. "I know about the affair. I know everything." The change in her demeanor was immediate. She froze, her fork clattering against her plate as her face paled. For a moment, there was silence, but it was thick and suffocating. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but there was also something else, defensiveness. How did you find out?" she stammered, her voice shaky, but she was already on the defensive, the shame evident in her posture. "I found the texts," I replied flatly. 31,000 of them. I know everything you've been hiding from me." Her eyes widened, and she looked down at her plate, as if she could avoid the conversation by focusing on something else. But it was too late. The truth was already out in the open. There was no running from it anymore. She tried to explain herself, of course, but her words felt hollow. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. I was lonely. I felt like I needed something more. You weren't there for me. You don't know how it felt. I wanted to scream at her, to lash out at the unfairness of it all, but I held myself back. The pain in her words made me sick. She tried to justify what she had done as if her feelings of neglect were somehow enough to excuse betraying the person who had always been there for her. It was as though she had built up an entire narrative to make herself the victim, the one who had been wronged. She had convinced herself that her actions were justified because she was entitled to them. She had rationalized the affair by placing the blame entirely on me. You don't get to make me the villain here, I said, my voice steady but forceful. You made the choice to lie to me, to betray my trust. You chose him over me. And now, you're trying to justify it like I owe you an explanation. I don't owe you anything. For the first time, I could see the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. It was as if she was searching for something to say, some defense that could make the situation better, but she couldn't find it. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. I stood up from the table and walked over to where I had placed her phone earlier. I retrieved it from the counter, opened the text thread, and held it in front of her face. These are the messages. You want to deny it? You want to tell me I'm wrong? Because I have proof. All of it. She reached for the phone, but I pulled it away from her grasp. You don't get to touch it, I said coldly. I want you to read every single word. I want you to see how you've been living a double life, how you've been lying to my face while pretending everything was fine. Her face turned a deep shade of red, but I could see her eyes welling up with tears. She tried to suppress them, but the reality of the situation was undeniable. This wasn't some misunderstanding. There were no excuses for what she had done. The affair was real, the betrayal was real, and now, so was the confrontation. I don't know how you thought you could keep this hidden, I continued, feeling a mixture of anger and disgust. How could you think I wouldn't find out? You were so careless, so indifferent to what you were doing to me. You had no respect for our relationship, for the vows we took. Her eyes were red now, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, she whispered. I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I was just trying to fill the emptiness. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how her words meant nothing, how she had destroyed everything we had. But I stayed calm, as difficult as it was. I had to take control of the situation, to stand firm in the face of her feigned remorse. You want me to believe that? That you just made a mistake? I asked, my voice hardening. No. You made a choice. You chose him, and now you want me to pick up the pieces of this shattered mess? It's over. I don't want your lies anymore. I don't need your excuses. The look in her eyes, desperation, regret, and fear, was almost unbearable. She tried again, her voice trembling. Please, I know I messed up. Please, don't leave me. I love you. I was just confused. I need you. You're the one I want. I could see the panic in her face, the realization that her world was crumbling. But it was too late for apologies. It was too late for her to pretend like I was the one who had wronged her. The truth was out, and it had cut deep. You don't get to ask for forgiveness now, I said firmly. You had your chance. And you chose someone else. In the days following the confrontation, the house felt like a foreign space. It was as if everything around me had changed, and I could no longer recognize the life I had once known. The walls, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt cold and suffocating. I walked through the rooms in a daze, feeling disconnected from everything. It was difficult to focus on anything, to remember the person I used to be before the revelation. I could no longer look at her without a rush of overwhelming emotions, betrayal, anger, sadness, disgust. Her presence in the house felt like an invasion, an unwelcome reminder of the lies and deceit I had uncovered. I was repulsed by the thought of her being around me. The more I saw her, the more I realized how deeply my trust in her had been shattered. There was no going back to what we had. It was as if that trust, once so solid, had been reduced to rubble, and there was no way to rebuild it. She spent the first few days after the confrontation in silence. I suppose she was trying to figure out what to say, how to fix everything that had been broken. But no amount of words could change what had happened. I had seen her true colors, and there was no denying it anymore. The woman I had once loved and trusted was not the person I thought she was. It was a harsh reality to accept, but I had no choice but to face it head-on. In the days that followed, she began to apologize, repeatedly. She begged for forgiveness, claiming she had made a terrible mistake and that she would do anything to make it right. She promised she would change, that she would work on herself and fix everything that had been broken between us. But her words meant nothing to me now. They were empty, hollow promises. After everything that had happened, I could no longer trust her, not even a little bit. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. I could see the desperation in her eyes as she continued to beg, but it was too late. The betrayal was too deep, and I had already made my decision. I could not continue to live a life built on lies, on a foundation that had already crumbled beneath me. It was time to take control of my life again. The decision to leave was not an easy one. I had spent years building this life with her. We had created memories, shared dreams, and worked together to build a future. To walk away from all of that was terrifying, but I knew I had no other choice. My peace, my happiness, my mental well-being, all of those things were more important than staying in a toxic relationship. I began making arrangements to move out. It wasn't something I wanted to do immediately, but I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I needed to put physical distance between us in order to begin the healing process. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the realization that I had been blind to the truth for so long. I had spent so many years trusting her, only for it all to come crashing down in an instant. The first few nights after moving out were the hardest. I felt a deep emptiness inside of me. I had always believed in the strength of our relationship, in the idea that love could overcome anything. But now, I felt betrayed by everything I had once believed in. The pain was overwhelming, and there were moments when I questioned my decision. Was leaving the right choice? Could I have worked things out? But deep down, I knew I had made the right call. I could no longer live a life of lies. I had to let go of the past in order to find peace. As time went on, I started to focus on my own healing. I sought therapy to help me navigate the intense emotions I was feeling. I knew that I needed to rebuild myself, to find out who I was again without her in my life. It wasn't easy. I had been so wrapped up in our relationship that I had lost sight of who I was as an individual. But through therapy, I began to gain clarity. I realized that I was not defined by the betrayal, by the heartbreak. I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. I also started to reconnect with friends and family. I had isolated myself for so long, prioritizing the relationship over everything else, but now I was learning to put myself first. The support from my loved ones was invaluable during this time. They reassured me that I was doing the right thing, that I was worthy of better. They helped me rediscover the person I had once been, before the lies, before the betrayal. I started to feel like myself again, and slowly, the anger and sadness began to lift. Meanwhile, she continued to try to reach out to me. At first, it was messages, texts, voicemails, emails. She told me she missed me, that she was sorry, that she wanted to make amends. But I had already heard all of her apologies. I had already seen the pattern. There was no trust left. There was no going back. When she realized that I wasn't going to respond to her messages, she resorted to more desperate measures. She showed up at my door, begging me to talk to her. She told me that she had made a huge mistake and that she was willing to do anything to fix our marriage. But I was firm in my decision. I had already moved on. There was no room for her in my life anymore. There was one particularly difficult moment when she sent me a long letter, detailing how much she regretted her actions. She said she couldn't live with herself for what she had done and that she was willing to make any sacrifice to prove her love. But again, I ignored her words. It was too late. The damage had been done, and I had learned the hard way that words alone could not heal the wounds she had inflicted. Eventually, I began to feel a sense of peace, a quiet calm that settled over me. I realized that I had taken control of my life again. The anger, the hurt, and the frustration that had consumed me were slowly fading away. I was starting to heal. I was no longer the person I had been in that toxic relationship. I was stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. One day, I ran into her while I was out running errands. She looked different, her eyes were red and puffy, and there was an air of defeat around her. She tried to approach me, but I held up my hand, signaling that I didn't want to engage. There was no need for more words. There was nothing left to say. She had already shown me who she was, and there was no going back. After the encounter, I felt a sense of closure. It was a sign that I had truly moved on, that I was no longer entangled in the web of lies she had woven. I had reclaimed my life, and with that came a newfound freedom. I was no longer weighed down by the burden of betrayal. I was no longer living in the shadow of her lies. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found joy in the small things again. I took up new hobbies, spent time with loved ones, and began to dream again. Slowly, I started to feel like myself once more, stronger than before. I had learned a hard lesson, but it was one that ultimately set me free. I no longer had to live in the shadow of someone else's mistakes. I was free to live my life on my own terms. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life experiences of betrayal, personal growth, and taking control of your life, make sure to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon so you never miss an update.